Welcome, and thank you for joining us at the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston this morning. I'm Dick Dowdy, and I've been a member of the church for more than 25 years. In today's sermon, titled Jewish Prophets and Christian Agitators, Reverend Scott is going to look at our fourth Unitarian Universalist source, Jewish and Christian teachings. He explores how these historic traditions can inform and help ground us during today's current events and trying times. For those of you who are new to our congregation or our online services, an especially warm welcome, and I invite you to continue watching after the benediction to hear more about the living tradition that is Unitarian Universalism. We now invite you to hear our call to worship.
We begin with the words of William Ellery Channing. Come then to this place to worship with the soul, to elevate the Spirit of God. Let not this house be desecrated by a religion of show. Let it not degenerate into a place of forms. Let not your pews be occupied by lifeless machines. Do not come here to take part in lethargic repetitions of sacred words. Do not come from a cold sense of duty to quiet conscience with the thought of having paid a debt to God. Do not come to perform a present task to ensure a future heaven. Come to find heaven now, to anticipate the happiness of that better world by breathing its spirit, to bind your souls indissolubly to your Maker. Come, let us worship together.
Celebremos compartiendo nuestras vidas, encendiendo esta luz.
Soon the day will arrive when we will be together, and no longer will we live in fear. And the children will smile without wondering whether on that day thunder clouds will appear. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Some have dreamed, some have died to make a bright tomorrow, and our vision remains in our hearts. Now the torch must be passed with new hope, not in sorrow, and a promise to make a new start. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me.
Please join me in the spirit that some call prayer and others name meditation. Open yourself to the wonders and mysteries of the world. Open yourself to compassion and empathy. Take one breath. Take another. Center yourself. This week, Derek Chauvin was found guilty of the murder of George Floyd. His conviction, a rare instance of a police officer being held to account for killing a civilian, especially a civilian who is a person of color. His trial marks a potential turning point where police officers who kill those they are supposed to serve and protect are begun to be held to account. I open our prayer this morning with this possible turning point, for it imbues the hour with hope. Hope for racial justice, hope for reconciliation, hope for a society where all are held equal before the law. O Spirit of life, that some of us name God and others know as the highest inspiration, the most beautiful point within each human heart, inspire us to recognize this possible turning point before us. Inspire us to recognize that it could only come because people marched, people organized, people wrote and spoke and imagined and came together to unite their human hands and their human hearts in the effort to build a better world. O Spirit of life, stir in us this morning and all the days of our lives so that we might work towards such efforts and be roused by such moments when justice seems more possible and a better world not as far off as it so often does. Let such hope, such possibility grow today and in all the hours of our lives as we face the crises of the hour and celebrate the victories and the sacred times, like this past Earth Day, when some chance of lessening the climate crisis seemed to maybe, just maybe, break through. In the knowledge that such possibilities rest in our human hearts, in our human hands, and that together we can sometimes witness potential turning points and move further towards building the beloved community, I invite the congregation, absent in body but present in the spirit, to say Amen. We pause now together to lift up that which sits heavy and light in our hearts. We lift up Mary Lynn Furray and Scott Tillinghast, longtime members who both died earlier this month. We send love to their friends and family during this difficult time. We also lift up Ken Abrahams, father to Steve, father-in-law to Cheryl, and grandfather to Ben and Daniel. He successfully underwent surgery this Thursday. I invite you to now say the name or bring to mind those you wish to be held by the loving embrace of this religious community. In this great cloud of witness and memory, amid this beloved community, we hear these names and hold them in our hearts. We pause in awe and wonder of the mystery that is life. In the spirit of love, in the spirit of hope, and in the spirit of compassion, I invite each of you to enter into a time of silent prayer, meditation, or reflection.
When the power goes out, these are our life-saving emergency items. These were all too familiar last February when we all had to try to do our best to maneuver with no power during the freezing weather. Some of us had no heat or water, and we had to make do. For a few days, it may not be so bad because we know that sooner or later the utilities will be back on and life will go on as usual. Now imagine you and your family having to use these emergency lights, propane stoves, and bottled water because you have no utilities. You couldn't afford to pay them. The money this month will only pay for half the rent, and you need to decide to keep the roof over your head and make do with no utilities. Many families in the Northwest Cyprus area are in just such a financial predicament. How do you homeschool with no power? How do you read by the light of a flashlight? How do you heat food or water when utilities have been shut off? First UU is partnering with Cyprus Assistance Ministries to fund families who have no money for utilities. Families have to make desperate choices because the public funds and assistance available do not cover utilities. These families need our help to have the most essential aspect for providing a home. Ask yourself what choices you would make when you only have little or no money to cover everything. Keep the lights on. Keep the water on. Please give generously. The shared offering will now be gratefully received.
Hello, I'm John Vindicilde, and this is my wife, Johanna DeYoung. We wholeheartedly support the Unitarian Universalist religion. 21 years ago, we became members at Thoreau UU, and recently, with the merger of Thoreau, we became members of the First UU of Houston.
We raised 3 children within the UU faith. Why did we choose the UU faith? William Ellery Channing, early 19th century minister and apostle of Unitarianism, sums it up best: the great end in religious instruction. The great end in religious instruction is not to stamp our minds upon the young, but to stir up their own, not to make them see with our eyes, but to look inquiringly and steadily with their own, not to give them a definite amount of knowledge, but to inspire a fervent love of truth. In a word, the great end is to awaken the soul, to excite and cherish spiritual life. In summary, Unitarian Universalism encourages children to think independently. Church has been vital in our lives. John has served on the First UU board, taught our whole life classes, and has prepared and projected digital services at Thoreau UU. Currently, I am on the First UU board and serve as one of 4 middle school RE teachers. I have done it all, from membership to hospitality to religious education to worship associate to congregational chaplain, to healthy communications team, to nomination committee, to stewardship and fundraising, to social action, to board representative at Thoreau UU and now at First UU. Why have we served, and why do we continue to serve? Simple answer is, we love Unitarian Universalism. Unitarian Universalism affirms and promotes 7 loving and responsible principles, and is a living tradition of spirituality and wisdom drawn from our 6 inspiring sources. The First UU has been committed in its quality of services and programming. In March 2020, COVID-19 forced First UU to transition from in-person to online Sunday services on YouTube. They rose to the challenge and surpassed expectations. The services are enhanced by creative, musical, and artistic talent. Quality has maintained consistent and has earned First UU supporters worldwide on the internet. Weekly, First UU presents discerning, challenging, and hopeful and loving message is. We have a board who works tirelessly with the First UU staff to ensure safe and optimal operations. We are most grateful for our work of our ministers, Reverend Colin Bosson and Reverend D. Scott Cooper, for their commitment to our spiritual lives and to the community we serve together. Thank you very much.
An excerpt from the Chapter 4 introduction from Sources of Our Faith, Inspirational Readings by Kathleen Rowlands. These two great religions, Christianity and Judaism, are two interwoven strands that compose the fabric of our faith. Both Unitarianism and Universalism were Protestant traditions that understood themselves to be following the teachings of Jesus in a form unadulterated by centuries of Christian church tradition. Also, Jesus was a Jew, and the religion he taught arose out of Jewish stories, values, and teachings before his followers developed it into a religion about him. Many Unitarian Universalists recognize the inadequacies of lumping Judaism and Christianity together into something called Judeo-Christian tradition. We honor the special place that both traditions hold in our history and in the current practice of many of our members. Even Unitarian Universalists who aren't very familiar with Judaism often find inspiration in the sacred Jewish texts, discovering fresh meaning and insight in them when explored within the context of a Unitarian Universalist community. In addition to sharing a Seder meal together, many Unitarian Universalists incorporate Yom Kippur and Hanukkah observations into their worship life. Hebrew scriptures are read and studied, and often are woven into the fabric of the liturgical year. Likewise, the teachings of Jesus and letters of Paul invite Unitarian Universalists into the insights available from a deeper relationship with liberal Christianity. Allowing the accretions of dogma that often surround the teachings of Jesus to dissolve, we see with fresh eyes the essence of his message. We can resonate with the second half of his great commandment, cited from the Torah, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." Through the spirit of Jesus' message, we can claim him as teacher, prophet, and guide, and freely examine and call upon this source as one of the deep wells from which we draw.
Our second reading is from the 13th chapter of Matthew, verses 13 through 17. This translation is called The Message. I don't want Isaiah's forecast repeated all over again. Your ears are open, but you don't hear a thing. Your eyes are awake, but you don't see a thing. The people are stupid. They stick their fingers in their ears so they won't have to listen. They screw their eyes shut so they won't have to look, so they won't have to deal with me face to face and let me heal them. But you have God-blessed eyes, eyes that see, and God-blessed ears, ears that hear. A lot of people, prophets and humble believers among them, would have given anything to see what you are seeing, to hear what you are hearing, but never had the chance.
In the 13th chapter of Matthew, Jesus invokes Isaiah, the prophet from the Hebrew Bible, and tells the disciples, "But you have God-blessed eyes, eyes that see, and God-blessed ears, ears that hear." A lot of people, prophets and humble believers among them, would have given anything to see what you are seeing, to hear what you are hearing, but never had the chance. In the English language, the word see can be used figuratively to mean understand. One of Merriam-Webster's definitions of see is to perceive the meaning or importance of, to understand. I've chatted recently with folks about how some people will accuse someone of not seeing what they mean or hearing what they're saying when they are really frustrated because the person isn't agreeing with them. Sometimes people don't agree with us because they see all too well. But that's a different road than the one I'm going down this morning. I intend to talk about how seeing our fourth UU source, Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves, may be helpful during this present challenging period, one in which it may be easy to lose hope and become discouraged. I'll admit, at first I thought the fourth source might be an easier one to talk about because many of us are more familiar with one or the other of these two faith traditions than with those things mentioned in the other sources. And when I say many of us, I should admit I mean me. But that turned out to be the very reason I found it more difficult. I may need to describe my situation, and perhaps this would have been a more appropriate disclosure while discussing the third source, wisdom from the world's religions. Urban areas are more diverse than where I grew up in northern Kentucky, even then, and certainly the Houston of today is way more diverse. If I knew anyone Jewish or really anything other than Christian growing up, it was from television or books. Nearly everyone I knew was Protestant, usually either Methodist or Baptist, and the most theologically diverse of my friends was Catholic. Like some kids today have learned a lot of history from the musical Hamilton, for many years my main source of knowledge of the Jewish faith was Fiddler on the Roof. And let's not even talk about Book of Mormon. So while reflecting fondly on my Protestant upbringing as representative of one of the sources is not too difficult, there are reasons I'm no longer a Methodist. I'm well aware of the many ways people have been hurt by the church. And, unfortunately, even today, many consider Judaism simply the warm-up act for Christianity. Once, when talking about this source with another UU minister, they asserted that while it was nice to give a shout-out to the Jewish faith, it was primarily the Christian faith, specifically Protestantism, that was most influential in our tradition. Well, I can see where they were coming from. Like Kathleen Rowlands said in our first reading, both Unitarianism and Universalism were Protestant traditions that understood themselves to be following the teachings of Jesus in a form unadulterated by centuries of Christian church tradition. But, she continues, Jesus was a Jew, and the religion he taught arose out of Jewish stories, values, and teachings before his followers developed it into a religion about him. So I would contend that Judaism has its place in this fourth source next to Christian teachings. Additionally, the Jewish faith is a covenantal one, an aspect of Unitarian Universalism I talk about a lot. We covenant with one another. We don't gather to learn correct beliefs. We agree how we will treat one another and the world. And when one of us breaks that covenant and doesn't treat another with respect, I hope we know that we can talk about it with them. A key concept of Judaism is the covenant. Jews believe God called forth a people, a community, who received God's revelation both through the sign of the covenant and the law. And this emphasis on group identity emphasizes community-based experience and worship. And like us, Judaism encompasses a wide corpus of texts, practices, theological positions, and forms of organization. Also, like Unitarian Universalists, Jews are more interested in what happens on this side of the grave. While Jews believe that the human soul is immortal, they believe that the nature of that immortality is beyond the understanding of humans. Almost 3 years ago, I was in Austin at a rally for the Poor People's Campaign. If you aren't familiar with it, please look it up on the internet. The Reverend Dr. William J. Barber, famous for Moral Mondays, has revived MLK's advocacy for the most disenfranchised among us. People from several UU churches were there, and at one point, after surveying the protesters and seeing a preponderance of yarmulkes and yellow Side with Love t-shirts, Daniel Cantor, the senior minister at First Unitarian of Dallas, turned to me and remarked, "It looks like mostly the Jews and the UUs again." It's true. In social justice work, the Jews and the UUs tend to show up in far greater numbers than our relatively small populations would predict. Having been those on the outside, we side with and advocate for those who need a voice to join with theirs. We are focused on here and now, as was Jesus when he taught his disciples to say, "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Dr. King called this creating the beloved community. As you're no doubt aware, our social justice work is far from complete. One of many problems is ongoing police brutality and a lack of accountability, especially against people of color. But on Tuesday of this week, former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was found guilty on all 3 counts he faced over the death of George Floyd. I've heard it referred to as justice, I have heard it referred to as accountability, but more often I have heard it referred to as relief and as a beginning. People on the street were interviewed immediately after the reading of the verdict, and some were in tears. Many were surprised, stunned, shocked. You get the idea. Why the shock, some might wonder? It was, after all, murder in the full light of day, as President Biden described it. One Australian headline declared, "Murderer who got caught committing murder on video found guilty of murder." As truth is so often revealed through humor, a skit on Saturday Night Live 2 weeks ago tells us why. 4 Minnesota newscasters are discussing the facts of the trial and agree on the obvious guilt of the former officer. There's video from multiple angles showing the officer snuffing out the life of the tortured man. When the 2 white commentators declare it's obvious he will be convicted, the 2 black commentators declare, "Not so fast. We've seen this movie before." Years of killers of black Americans being found not guilty had many resigned to the conclusion that a white police officer would once again not be held accountable. I recently learned of something called learned helplessness. It's the act of giving up as a result of consistent failure to be rewarded in life. A while back, I remember hearing volunteers at a food pantry bemoaning the fact that the clients wouldn't use the computer made available to them to apply for jobs online. It was long before I had heard the term learned helplessness, but I remember thinking, well, if you woke up each morning and flipped the light switch and nothing happened, how long would you continue to do that? And after you stopped, how many people watching you might say, well, clearly they enjoy being in the dark. When women see less qualified men again being promoted ahead of them or elected instead of them, and when those politicians again make promises to get elected and do too little to fulfill those promises, When schools and legislators again devise new ways to persecute and humiliate our queer youth, and when officers again aren't held accountable for their mistreatment and even killing of black citizens for years, these are repetitions that drain hope and become learned helplessness. Thus, when many heard the guilty verdict, when they saw Derek Chauvin being handcuffed and led away, it was a sign of relief that perhaps there's still a reason to hope. It's a reason to believe that, just maybe, this is the beginning of people who do wrong being held accountable. Perhaps we do have God-blessed eyes, eyes that see, and God-blessed ears, ears that hear. A lot of people, prophets and humble believers among them, would have given anything to see what we are seeing, to hear what we are hearing, but never had the chance. Of course, most of us would not have seen this murder or even heard about it had a 17-year-old Darnella Frazier not recorded the video that went viral. Other videos followed. It appears that the other officers present did little or nothing to stop the murder. In the deeply misleading press release from the Minneapolis Police Department afterwards, citing medical distress, makes clear their intention to not acknowledge the truth. During the Civil Rights era, most white folks were willfully ignorant of the abuse of minorities. People's ears were open, but they didn't hear a thing. Their eyes were awake, but they didn't see a thing. They stuck their fingers in their ears so they wouldn't have to listen. They screwed their eyes shut so they wouldn't have to look. But 55 years before George Floyd's death, video of police beating protesters on the Edmund Pettus Bridge was shown on the nightly news. It became known as Bloody Sunday. Public opinion began to shift. God-blessed eyes finally saw. Today, with nearly everyone having a video camera in their pockets, egregious behavior is more likely to be recorded and is more likely to see the light of day. It becomes less possible for white folks to say, they must have done something to provoke it. We've been told that they hadn't done anything to provoke it for years. Why did so many not want to believe them? Why did we have to see it with our own eyes to acknowledge it? Do the scales only fall from our eyes every 55 years to acknowledge the abuse of our fellow humans? The concept of scales falling from eyes and being able to see, both literally and figuratively, comes from the book of Acts in the New Testament, when Saul of Tarsus is healed from blindness. As a Roman citizen, he also had the Latin name of Paul, which he used when communicating with the Greco-Roman audience. At least 7 and up to 14 of the 27 books of the New Testament are attributed to Paul. I couldn't easily avoid mentioning Paul in this sermon, not so much because of the reference to blindness, but because he had one foot in the tradition of Judaism and one in the very new practice of Christianity. If you've read the book Love Beyond Belief, which I talked about in February when I discussed the theologian Tandaica, you'll know it's even more interesting and complicated than that. Also, apropos to today's discussion, before becoming Paul, the best-selling author, Saul of Tarsus was known for the persecution of those unlike himself. But, like many after him, and without the benefit of video, he realized the error of his ways. After his conversion, Paul began to preach that Jesus of Nazareth was the Jewish Messiah and the Son of God. Now, in my humble opinion, that was the start of taking the religion of Jesus and remaking it into a religion about Jesus. But either way, both were concerned with hope. Paul had hope that belief in Jesus meant salvation, while Jesus gave hope to the oppressed and downtrodden by actually seeing them with God-blessed eyes and hearing them with God-blessed ears, and showing us that we can and should do the same. That our job is to work to make things better, to create that beloved community here on earth. In his book, Celebrating Life, the British Orthodox rabbi, philosopher, and theologian Lord Jonathan Sacks wrote, "Optimism is the belief that things are going to get better. Hope is the belief that we can make things better. Optimism is a passive virtue. Hope is an active one. It takes no courage to be an optimist, but it does need courage to hope. Both hope and optimism is in short supply with those with learned helplessness. In fact, some believe clinical depression may be related. But over the past decades, neuroscience has provided insight into learned helplessness and shown that the original theory actually had it backwards. The brain's default state is to assume that control is not present, and the presence of helpfulness is what is actually learned. So what does this mean? It means that we can come together in community and give each other hope by showing that we have the power to affect our lives and our futures and the world. Hope is an active virtue. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. paraphrased Unitarian minister Theodore Parker and said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." I believe we saw it bend a little further this week. We have God-blessed eyes, eyes that see, and God-blessed ears, ears that hear. A lot of people, prophets and humble believers among them, would have given anything to see what we are seeing, to hear what we are hearing, but never had the chance. In his "I've Been to the Mountaintop" speech, Dr. King said, "I just want to do God's will, and He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land. May we not squander the hope and momentum we are now experiencing." Amen, and so be it.
Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we'd first begun. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Hope is an active virtue. May we come together in covenant and in community and give each other hope by demonstrating that we do have the power to better our lives and our futures and the world. Go forth and find heaven now. Anticipate the happiness of that better world by breathing its spirit, and make the most of the hope and momentum we are now experiencing. Amen.
Please join us in thanking Connie Acosta, Johanna DeYoung, and staff members Alma Viscata and Alex Kamig. Music director Mark Vogel was joined by guest soloist Yael Miller. For those of you who may be new to this congregation or the online services, let us say a few words about Unitarian Universalism. Unitarian Universalism is a faith where you can bring your whole self, your full identity, your questioning mind, your expansive heart. As Unitarian Universalists, we join together on a journey that honors everywhere we've been before. Together we create a force more powerful than one person or one belief system. Our beliefs are diverse and inclusive. Rather than a creed, we share a covenant based on a set of 7 principles. These include the free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and the knowledge that we are part of an interconnected web of all existence that calls us to honor the earth and all creatures. Thank you for being with us today.
Our church continues to meet online while a pandemic keeps us physically apart. There are groups meeting both weekly and monthly to keep you connected and engaged with our community. Whether you're sipping matcha tea, a macchiato, or a mimosa, join us this morning at 11:30 for the Coffee Half Hour to chat with new and old friends. Next, join the discussion circle at noon for a conversation asking, what are your thoughts on sustainability? A new gathering for those members and friends of First UU who identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color is beginning today at 4. RSVP to BIPOC at firstuuhouston.org to get the Zoom link or more information. 2 board members will be available Wednesday at 7 to fill you in and answer questions about the most recent board meeting. Join those asking who is Jesus and why did he have such a profound effect on the world. The UU Bible study of the Gospels is Wednesday at 7. The Sanctuary Choir meets virtually Thursday at 7:30 to make friends and beautiful music, and they are welcoming new voices. Email mark@firstuuhouston.org for the link. Many of the topics for upcoming discussion groups are on our website, firstuuhouston.org/online-group-meetings. Visit there for more details and to sign up. And remember, all times shown are Central Daylight Time.